Okay, so when we left off yesterday, we had been working on the ability to request the current balance based on an incoming SMS message. And then depending if the text message came in from a known phone number um, and also had the word balance, then we would return the balance. Otherwise, we would log a message and just drop it. I was using ngrok, which is a nifty tool that allows me to um, basically expose on the World Wide Web, on the internet, uh, a local host running application. So as you can see from this screen here, I've got this thing that is, basically some random ID at ngrok.io. If anything hits that URL, it will be forwarded to my local host port 8080, which is where the KidBank Spring Boot application is running on my local machine. And so we can see that here, so it's currently running, and it's all hooked up so that an incoming test message will be forwarded in. And I can actually use one company's SMS provider to send a text message to Twilio. So I'm actually using Amazon Pinpoint to send a text message basically to uh, my Twilio phone number. And so I'm basically sending the message balance. However, the phone number it's going to be coming from is probably going to be random, and there's no way for me to know that it's going to be correct. But at least it demonstrates that uh, we'll see that if I send this message and they're successfully sent, and now I switch over to my app, we can see that there was a message balance from some unknown number, and this is basically coming from Amazon. And since it was unknown, we basically just dropped it and didn't return anything. And only if it's a known number, which right now I've just hard coded, so this will actually never work in real life. Only if it's hard coded, sorry, only if it matches a known number will it actually return the balance. And that's to protect that someone who happened to find the incoming SMS phone number didn't just randomly um, ask for the balance. Not that it's that sensitive, but you want to sort of start out secure. So what we had in terms of some of our tests was this test where the balance request SMS from Twilio should respond with the current balance. So balance request. These two words are actually a bit redundant from this thing. So I'm going to say, just since it's already an SMS balance check test, I'm going to say from Twilio via known number should respond with current balance, right? Because that's really what we're testing here. We're testing that balance with a known number. This message SID doesn't really matter, that we expect to actually get an okay with the content, and then there's this big XML string, which is what Twilio expects as a response. And so today I'm going to finish writing the tests, and we're going to create some services that will make it easier for me to configure the phone number that's authorized. So let's stop the application, and we'll close that, and we'll run this test, which should pass. It'll take a little while to run because it has to bring up Spring and scan and get the Hibernate and database stuff running and do all that kind of stuff so that it can actually get to the good part. Okay, so that works. So now what we want to do is we want to have another test, which is from Twilio via unknown number should return empty string. Right, so the idea is that if I send a request from a number that's not known, then we'll get an OK, but the string will be empty because we don't want to respond with anything. We just sort of want to drop it on the floor. Right? We don't even want to say, hey, you're invalid or anything, because that would sort of provide some information. We simply don't need to do that. We don't need to do a deposit because we're not checking anything there, so we can pretty much do this this perform post and pretty much copy most of it. And so we'll do that. The from, I can make something that is for sure to be unknown, or I can actually just put in just a different area code. This message SID doesn't matter. I'm going to take it out. And so we want the string to basically be the empty string. And if we go to our controller class, we can see that that's what it returns. Let's have it return something else, because I always like to have tests fail. We actually should have written this before I implemented returning null. Now, this doesn't need to be an integration test. So I'm actually wondering if I actually need to do this, because I already have an integration test that is making sure the application form URL encoded is working as expected. But I don't need this one to actually be an integration test. I like to minimize the number of integration tests I have because they just take too long and tend to be very brittle. So what I'm actually going to do is go ahead and create a regular unit test. Oh, I'd forgotten. I already did that, right? So I actually had the test from unknown number should return empty response, and from known authorized number should return balance message. So, all right, I already had that. And so I guess the question is, are there any other stories here? Right, so when it's known, that's the known one. When it's unknown, it does nothing. If it's a known number, but it doesn't know what it is yet, then it should return some message. So let's implement that. Let me do this. Let me rename this test. I know this is a bit redundant. It's already in the integration test basically directory, but because it's not in any specific package, sometimes it's hard to remember. So let's go back to this one. And we want a test which is from known number with unknown message should return error message. So here the idea is, so we'll basically do our setup. Do that. And so we want this as basically our unknown message. Doesn't matter what it is, but it's from a known number. And we then want to get the response from the controller that we're testing. And we want to assert that the response contains did not understand wrong message. Use balance to check your account balance. So let's try that. Now what we can do is we can copy this. So if we run this test, let's actually run all let's run all the unit tests, because they all run very quickly, so there's no point in just running the ones in this class. And we should only have this one as failing, because we haven't implemented anything there yet. We've got 2 tests failing. Oh, right, because this one, we said nothing. We actually changed that, but actually we didn't need to do that. So let's do that. And now this test basically contain the balance when it actually should not have. It should have verified that the text was balanced and not wrong message. So let's go and fix that. So here we have the request itself, and if request dot get body dot equals, and we'll do equals ignore case because we don't care if it comes in with upper or lower case, balance, then we'll return the balance, else, and this is already getting messy, right? So we'll have to refactor this. Need a close paren there. So here we'll return, and this will be the request, basically what we received as the message. All right, so basically, if it's known and if it's balanced, then we return the balance. If it wasn't balanced but it's still known, right? This is already many levels deeper than I would like, so we're going to pretty quickly refactor that. So let's run all the unit tests, and whoops, I forgot semicolon. All right, so that passed. And now let's clean up this code, right? So in our TDD cycle, we have done the failing test, we have made the test pass, and now we're at the refactoring stage. So what this is basically trying to figure out if the incoming command is correct. And so what we can do is we can replace these if statements with sort of validate. And so we can say, so there are a couple of things we can do. The simplest thing we can do to pull this out is what we want is we want this is the important code, right? This is the thing where basically we're returning the balance in the Twilio XML format. But this is basically just error information. So what we can do is we can say validate command and hand in the request get body. Right, and so the idea here is, in fact, we can pull this into a variable. We'll replace just this one, and this is the command. And so now we can basically put this, whoops. We can take this part, so let's, oops, sorry, I went multiple cursor crazy here. So take this part and now pull out this. And we'll put that into the validate command. So basically I'm creating a method here, validate command, takes the command text, and if the command is, I'll just replace that, Probably could have done a better refactoring for that. And so it needs to return a string. So because that string is going to be, so that's interesting. So there's a couple of things we could do here, because what I want is I want the string to be returned. So yeah, so the question is what do I want to do here? I want to make it so that if the command is correct, then it will just continue. If it's not correct, I actually want it to return this string. That's going to be kind of, I want to return the string, but I don't want to have to check the return value of validate command, because that sort of defeats the purpose. So what do I want to do here? I could throw an exception and then handle it that way, but that, I don't know, I kind of don't want to do that here. All right, let's undo this, let's back off. And so we're back to here. So let me just run the tests, make sure we're back in a good state. Okay. Let's see, so we could put this whole thing in a method which is execute command. And we can see though that the parameter that it's going to take is the request, but the request actually, for executing the command, it doesn't need all that information. So what we can do is we can pull out request.getBody and replace this with the command text. And so now if we extract this to a method, which is execute command, we can see that it takes a string. And here we can basically pull this out into let's leave that as is. We can make this private because it doesn't need to be public. And so at least we've pulled out the command into a separate thing. I'm going to flip this condition because then it makes it easier to see as basically a guard clause. So basically, if it doesn't equal balance, then it returns that text message. The only question is this actually will need to be wrapped in some TWIML so that it gets properly handled by Twilio. So let's do this. We have our balance in TWIML, which takes the balance string, balance amount. But what we want to do is, that's the message, and then we can pull this out into text, so wrap in TWIML, and then inline this again. So balance in TWIML basically prepends this your balance is, and then calls this wrap in TWIML. And what we can do here is surround this with wrap in TWIML. Okay, so let's run our tests. We shouldn't have changed anything other than wrap this with TWIML, but our test was just looking for a contain, so that should still work, and it does. The other part is we want to authorize this. So if, let's flip this, and we can take out this else. And so now this is the primary thing where it's just we return executing the command. And then here, this let's see, so we don't need the command text until down here. Oh, but we log it. Okay, so we need it up there. And so I'm going to switch this back. So I'm going to basically pull this out into a method, which is, although actually I just want to pull the phone number out. So pull this out into a variable from phone. And so now, because really what I want is I want this to be basically this is the is known phone number. So if it's a known phone number, and we can basically inline this back. Now I'll leave it that way. All right, so basically if this is, if it's a known phone number, we execute the command. Otherwise, we return an error message. And already this feels like a lot to be doing in my controller. I prefer to have this somewhere else. And so what we're going to find is especially since we do not want to hard code this for much longer, there are a couple of options. One is we could pass in to this controller, we could pass in a list of known phone numbers. Right now it only checks one, but obviously we'd want to have a list. And we could pass that in and as just a string. But it'd be better to have actually a service of some sort that validates, that tells us whether this phone number is valid or not. So, right, we want to call something, some service dot, is this a known phone number? And we'll eventually also want maybe to wrap this execute command in an object. Right now it's not so bad because we only have one command, which is balance. But if we want to implement more commands, it would be nice to do that. And then we'll see we can then integrate it with inside of our domain. There's other places, other adapters where we convert deposits and spending money into commands, and that would be sort of a nicer architecture. There's a little bit of, it's not quite command query responsibility segregation, the CQR stuff that you might be familiar with, but it's just basically the command pattern, which is useful. But that's more complex than we need it right now. We might look at that when we do a higher level refactor, but right now I think this is not bad. But we do want to get this is known phone number stuff out of this specific controller. Because one of the things that I'm going to do is I'm going to also be using, besides Twilio, there are a couple of other SMS providers like the Amazon Pinpoint, as we saw, but also Bandwidth, Nexmo, and a couple of others. And it'd be nice to be able to switch between those because some of those are cheaper. Not that text messages are very expensive. They're like 0.75 cents. But, you know, it adds up. Okay, so our goal here then is to, so the other thing is even if we were happy with this code, which it's okay, from a testability standpoint, it's really hard to test this because I had to hard code these unknown and known numbers. I couldn't force it to say this is a known number and this is a known number. So this test requires clearly knowledge about what I've hard coded. Plus, I don't want to hard code that for much longer because I actually want to deploy it to Heroku and have it read in an actual authorized phone number. So what I'm trying to do here is I want to set up a way that the SMS controller, besides getting a reference to account, is going to need some phone authorization authorizer or something like that. So let's go. So all our tests are passed, so we're good there. And so now again we're at the refactoring stage. So this is known phone number we actually want to put somewhere else. We want to put that responsibility somewhere else that really is part of our domain, right? It's not part of the adapter. It's so sort of going back to my diagram, right? We're concerned with not the adapter, but the application domain core, right? Because phone number being valid, that's part of our domain model. And so we want to be able to convert it to something so we can deal with phone numbers properly. One of the things that we'll need to do is also deal with the proper format for phone numbers. So as I mentioned last time, there's this phone number E164 format. And so the idea is that country code 1, which is the United States, given the standard 10-digit phone number, right, area code plus number, this is the E164 format, basically +1 and then the rest of the number. Different country codes will obviously have different prefixes, and so their E164 will be different. And so what we want to do is we want to have some service that provides a way to say, hey, is this phone number valid? So we'll want to start out with, we'll create a new class. And it's going to be, I'm not sure what it's going to be. So it's always hard to come up with a name because I should actually be starting with a test. So let's do that. So let's go to our tests, and this is going to be a domain test, and we'll call this class phone number authorization test. And so now I'll write a test, and known phone number should be known. Right. So the question is, and again, this is what I love about always writing my tests first, is not because necessarily I have a test, although that's great, but it helps me figure out what is the right API, what's the right name for things, what's the right name for the class, what's the right name for the method, and so I can play around with this here. So what I'm going to want is where if I have a phone number, and I'll use +1, 212-555-1212. And so that's a proper E164 phone number. I want to say that, let's say I want to assert that that's known. So Boolean is, and my Pomodoro timer just went off, so we'll take a break in a minute. Is known equals, and so I want some class, XYZ, is known. And so would it be phone? So interestingly, we can see that Twilio has a phone number type. We can actually take a look at that for a second. actually go to that. So raw number, that's interesting. So it implements endpoint, but it just returns a string. I would have thought, I kind of would have thought that it would have a bit something more than that. But I guess it's just raw number. Okay. I would have thought it would have some validation around the E164 stuff. I wonder if it has anything here. No. How about there? No, all right, nothing obvious, so forget that. Okay, so new phone number authorizer. Author. Authorizer, so is known, and basically handed in the phone number. All right, so basically given a phone number authorizer, we can ask it, is this known? So we'll create this as a class. This goes in our source main. It's in our domain. And that's a spelling. What is it? Wondering if that's spelled correctly. Okay. Guess it's just not used to seeing it spelled like that. Whoops. And so we'll create an isKnown method. And I'm putting raw phone number because that's fairly common. Basically, this is the unvalidated string. And let me basically say this is spelled correctly. And so now I can assert that isKnown is true. And this will obviously fail because we basically return false from here. Okay, so that failed as expected. Let's take a couple-minute break, and when we come back, we'll implement this and start expanding it from a little method into a full-fledged service that the domain will have, and then we'll be able to provide ways to use it to make our tests easier to work with. We basically now want to make this phone number authorizer figure out how this is known. So if we go here, so I could return true, and I can go the sort of more pure TDD route, but it's pretty easy to predict what will happen next. So the question is what is a known phone number? So we can have a private string that is a known phone number, and we'll call this a known raw phone number. So you can see that we're defining some ubiquitous language. So domain-driven design concept of making sure that the meaning of things is very clear. And having worked with companies that deal with phone numbers, this is critical. Like, what is a phone number? What is a raw phone number? Which one is the string? Which one is the fully valid E.164 thing? That's really, really important because if you don't get that right, you will pay for it heavily later on. And I've seen this kind of thing with other companies where event versus message versus a stream of messages. What do you call those things? If you don't have really tight naming on that, that's consistent, at least in the team that you're working with, you're really asking for a world of hurt. All right, so what we want to do is, well, let's not make this final. I'll tell you why in a second. So we'd like to be able to set this value. Now I can do it in the constructor, but if we look a little bit ahead, which is this thing is going to be instantiated by Spring, and therefore will become tagged with a service, then if we have a string in the constructor, it's going to get a little messy on how that's going to be instantiated. Although actually we could use the value annotation. You know what, let's try that. So let's make this final, and we'll now create a constructor. And so if we go back to our test, which is the one that's using it, we can say, okay, what is the known phone number? That's going to basically be this. And so the constructor is basically saying, here's the known number. And if we run this test, it'll still fail because we're not comparing it, but that's fine. So now we can go and compare it. So if the known raw phone number equals the raw phone number that we got passed in. And so that now will pass our test. So this is now our domain unit test, and this passes, and we could clearly create another test for unknown phone number should not be known. Right, so we can basically say sort of copy almost all of this. And we expect this to be false. Now this will fail because we haven't changed the contents. And so now we want to say, make this something totally different, just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 0. And so now that should pass. Note that we're not doing any validation, and I'm not yet happy with the fact that we're storing it as a raw phone number, but we'll fix that. We'll fix that in a bit. So this works in our domain, but this is by itself it works. And so the question is what we want is we want to be able to have this authorizer injected into the SMS controller. So let's go there. So let's go to our SMS balance request test. And so now we can't hard code these anymore. We need to set up the SMS controller. So what we want is we're going to want to pass in. Now there are a couple of options. One is we could create a sort of a fake one, but it's pretty easy to configure the authorizer to not have to do a fake one. So let's go and create a phone number authorizer. And so we can pass in known number. And now we can have this be passed in. Let's go ahead and add that. And so we'll leave it at that. We'll find that there's going to be some stuff that doesn't compile because now we've forced everybody to use the construct that takes both. So we go here. This is not yet used, so we should make sure to do that. Actually, I'd like a better name for that. Okay. Yes, let's also refactor the name of the parameter. Cool. Okay. And we can make this final. And we'll see, we'll hook this up to the controller in a second. So let's change our no number, right? Because we now want to not rely on what was hard-coded in our test. So let's change those to 415. Okay, so from unknown number should return empty response. From known number, so let's go ahead and create this. And we can actually make this, sort of make this a constant. So I'll do that. And now we don't have to create it here. The idea is we always want the phone number authorizer to have the same from known number, right? So this is the known number. It's authorized. It will always be used here. We can make this private. Okay, so if we run these tests, something's going to fail because it's not using it. We changed the raw number. Oh, right, this should be that thing. Good. Okay. So both of these failed. Right. From known should return balance message. From unknown should return, and this one, basically they're always unknown, so it's always going to return an empty message. So that's great. So let's fix the one from known authorized number should return balance message. Right. That's this one that's failing. So we're basically saying the phone number authorizer uses the known number. This is the known number. So let's go ahead and go into our controller and have it delegate. So instead of using this method, we're going to have it use the phone number authorizer is known. And so now if we run our tests, I think both will now pass. Let's see. Yep, so now they all pass. So we've gotten rid of some code from here. We're tying it to this phone number authorizer. The problem now is okay, so we've got our domain tests running. The problem is from the outer level, and so let's go to our balance check integration test. We're going to see that this isn't going to work because the number that we're using here, and so let's change this also. Let's call this 408. And I'm going to extract this out to a variable, which is this should be a known number. Well, this will fail for two reasons, right? If we actually run this test, we'll see that when Spring tries to start up, it's not going to be able to auto-wire the SMS controller because the SMS controller takes a phone number authorizer that is not marked as something that Spring knows about. And so there's our error. So fail to load application context, and let's see if that's as expected. So caused by error creating bean with SMS controller. So the problem there is an unsatisfied dependency. And what that means is basically there's no phone number authorizer implementation that Spring knows about. So that's expected. That's good. So we can go and fix that. Now, if we go to phone number authorizer and simply say, okay, this is a service, the problem is here, if we try to run that same test, we're going to see that it's not going to know how to instantiate this because it doesn't know where to get this string from. And so what we're going to need to do is figure out, okay, where should it get the string from? So if you look here, error creating bean with phone number authorizer, right? Basically no qualifying bean for the string, right? It can't figure out what to put here. So what we want to do is we want to, so let's go to docs spring.io, and we want, so we basically want external configuration, value, external configuration, auto wiring, Spring Boot. So you'll remember this from yesterday. This is the way we can get stuff in. So we can do property values can be injected directly into our beans using the value annotation. So yesterday we looked at using the configuration properties. So let's go back to that for a second. So here is our Twilio config. And so this is configuration where it gets its properties from the application config, those that are prefixed with Twilio. And so if we look at our application properties, we see that basically that covers these two. What we're interested now is getting this thing plugged in, and actually we should express it in E164. So it must be in E164 format. That is plus, that's good enough. Okay, so what we want to do is we want to get this injected into the phone number authorizer. Later on, this won't be hard-coded in a config file, right? Once we have profiles and other things like that, this won't be hard-coded. But for now, the good old Yagni principle, you ain't gonna need it. This is good enough for now. So whereas we set up basically a bean, right? Which is basically a Java bean that just has getters and setters for these things, and it reads it automatically in from the property file. We don't want to create another, we could create a separate properties file, but really we just want to sort of inject that directly into the constructor. So here we want to figure out how do we get this injected. So we can do this, right? We can use @value. I think we can also do this on an incoming variable into a constructor. So I think that works. So let's take that. We could inject it up here. Why are there multiple choices? Import class. Oh, yeah, we don't want the Lombok one, we want that one. And this property, what was it? It was authorize.phone.number. Probably want to be a little bit more consistent in our terminology for known versus authorized. We'll see that this is known but may not be authorized to get access to information. So I'm going to call this known phone number. And we'll put that in here. But if we do that, right, then our tests can't hand this in. So what we really would like to do is put that here. And so let's look at this annotation. Does this apply to, so the target can be a parameter, which is good. So I think that will work. So let's go and try running our test now. Okay. That's good, because basically it read stuff in, and now it's just saying, basically it's not authorized, right? Because we expected this message, but basically we got nothing. But that is good, because that's better than what we had before, right? So the system starts up, it injected the right thing. This is a known number, and so now what we need to do is we need to say, how do we get this phone number to be known, right? So right now that's in our application properties here, and so what we want to create is a test application properties. So that way we can control what is known, because this should be known, but this doesn't match what is in sort of the application properties. I could go and change the application property, but the whole point is that would be something that would be set somewhere else. So what we want to do is we want to create in our test framework, we want to create a different test. We want to basically create a test configuration class. So if we go, let's go up. And so we want some testing stuff. And I always recommend that you start with, right, when you're looking for anything in terms of Spring, when you start looking for stuff, start looking in the Spring documentation, because it's going to have, right, it's the authority. It's the primary authority. Things like Stack Overflow, you may find the right answer, but you don't know if they're up to date. And there might not be the sort of current correct way to do it. So what we want to do is, let's see. This might actually be good. Instead of having to go through the work of creating a separate properties file, this test property values might be useful. Let's see what that looks like. So if we go test property values of, so what does this thing say? Test for adding properties. Properties can be applied to Spring or to the system environment. Okay. And of says that one. Turn the timeline map property with these. So this returns a test property values, but the question is, what do we do with it? Does it just do it? Oh, we have to apply to env. And so the question is where do we get the environment? This configurable application context. This is the only downside of some of the Spring docs. Is like, I would love to see a slightly larger example here. Because I have a feeling I want a configurable application context. So the question is, should I inject that? Let's see. So test property values. Well, I guess we could look at the docs. 2.13, by the way, was just released, and I have a note to upgrade to the 2.1x line, because I think I'm on the 2.0 line. Property can apply to Spring environment. I'd love an example. Let's look here. By the way, Program Creek is an interesting site because what it does is it basically scans open source and looks for actual usages in actual code. let's see. So this one basically uses test property values of and applies to environment. And so if we look at the source code for this, where is environment? Is that injected using auto-wired? So there's the context. So here's configurable environment. Oh, it's not, it's just new. How does it use it? So Spring application. This looks a little bit overkill for what we need. This context, basically the instantiate one. I don't want to instantiate one. I want to let like Spring Boot do the right thing. Let's see, are there other examples? This one might be useful. So what is context? Okay, so it's creating it. I wonder though if I can get this injected. Let's look for some other examples. This looks possible. Yeah, I think I can get that injected though. So if we look here, so what was it? This was known phone number equals +1 408 555 1212 apply to, and so the question is where do we want a configurable application context. So context, and I think I want to create a field. So can I auto-wire this? I don't know. Let's try it. While that's running, I'm going to look for some other examples. Ooh, just heard big thunder because we've got lots of thunderstorms here in California, Bay Area. Context refresher tests. So the test failed. And so I'm curious if this actually did, if we actually got a valid context. This is where knowing a bit more deeper about some of the internals of Spring would be useful. So all right, if I can't get this to work, I'm gonna go the other route. So let's go auto-wired of so let's see. Yeah, so this was the one where we're looking at trying to figure out how to use this. So we're using Spring Boot Test, which does a bunch of things. But let's see. So auto configuration. Test configuration. So we could go down the test configuration route. Why don't we do this? Let's run this in debug mode. So we'll debug this, and if that doesn't work, then we'll go the other route of having a configuration class in our test that configures this. So context, okay, so we have context. Okay, well, okay, so this was injected. This is our generic web application context. And if we look inside of it, we see a bunch of stuff. We see our Bean Factory post processors. Here's our config file thing. So this looks okay. Here's our environment, and here's our property sources. And I blew past a Pomodoro, but that's okay. So this looks correct. I wonder, so now I'm wondering if this test property values thing worked and something else is wrong. So let's do this. Let's set a breakpoint in our controller. Yeah, the phone number authorizer. I wonder if that was already created. All right, so let's set a breakpoint here inside of our SMS controller, but let's also set a breakpoint here in our constructor, and we'll just continue. Okay, yeah, so phone number authorizer was already created, and the property was not overridden. I wonder if that happens too late, because it might be that by the time we're ready, it's too late because the application context has already been set up, and we'd have to, yeah, all right. So it's probably too late in the process because the Spring Boot test is automatically creating things for us. All right, well then let's back out of that. So let's remove these breakpoints. So all right, so let's not go this way. Let's go the other way of creating. So actually, no, I want to stay here. So the other way we can go is we can create, where is it? Auto configured. Because what we want to do is we want to mocking. I basically want to have property settings. Okay, so test configuration. That's what we wanted. So we can mark a test configuration class. That's not going to help either, because the value is being injected not even via the configuration class, right? So we're not even reading in as a configuration. It's actually being injected directly, right? So if we go to phone number authorizer, we can see this value right here is being injected directly because value takes it directly from the properties file. That's why I was hoping the test property values thing would work. I wonder if it's just not early enough. Oh, well, okay, so then this is actually what we wanted. We can just say this as a parameter to our Spring Boot test. Ooh, let's try that. Okay. So let's go back to our test. Spring Boot test. Oops. Yeah, so we can set properties right here. Okay. I wish that was more obvious. So what does it look like? So we can just pass a string here, and that string is going to be our known phone number and +1 408 555 1212. So that's nice. That should be added to the Spring environment before the test runs. Oh, well, that was easy. I wish that had been a bit more obvious, but okay. This is where sometimes documentation is difficult to use because you almost want more of a cookbook format. Like, here's like 3 different ways to override properties that are injected, kind of thing. And one way is using Spring Boot test properties. Another is that other one that I think if you're manually creating the configuration probably works better. We don't need this anymore, so let's delete this. Remove field. All right, so let's run this test. All right, so the goal was we wanted to change this number in our test so it matches our known number, and so that way we will actually get content back instead of it just being dropped on the floor. And that works. Okay, good. So let's run our unit tests. Okay, great. So now that means if we specify this known phone number in an environment variable, it will override the one that's set in our config file. And that's what we want because our goal here is to make it configurable enough that we can deploy it into another environment. Right, so we've established that it works fine if we sort of configure it locally, but I don't even want like a valid phone number in my config file that's checked into the GitHub repository. That should not be part of my code. It's fine to sort of have temporary or placeholder variables there, but I don't want those in my code. All right, so let's. So this seems okay, and we can specify this on the command line, or it can come from an environment variable. I wonder though if it's going to be an environment variable, whether having dots in it is a good idea. I'm going to try something. So if we said export that equals +1. So I wonder how much is going to be interpreted by it's going to be interpreted by the shell. Let's see, 650 123 1234. Oops. Maybe we should make it underscores to be a bit safer. Because I'm not sure. Well, I wonder if that's a valid thing in Heroku. Let's see. Let's see what are valid names. So config vars. So I can do it by the Heroku command line. I can also do it on the dashboard, and I'll actually do it on the dashboard just because that's easier. Yeah, so that's gonna. I'm concerned that having the dots in there and it being lowercase is sort of weird. What I really want to do is I want to have it read. I mean, this is all temporary anyway, because it's going to go away. So, all right, let's take the path of least resistance here. So let's change that so that instead of it being dotted, it's all uppercase. So, so we'll call this known phone number. And we'll go into our application properties, change it here. And when we run our integration test, oh, and we need to change our integration test so that it uses the same thing. Okay. And so now let's run all the tests. And while it does that, I'm going to go into Heroku. I'm going to go into the dashboard for Heroku. So I'm going to go into my dashboard. And we'll go to KidBank. And we'll go to, I think it's under settings. Yeah, config vars. All right, so I'm going to switch over to my secret mode. Okay, so let's go into our config vars. And so the key is our known phone number, and that's that. Cool, okay. So I basically set that. And back here. And all our tests ran, okay. So what else do I need to do? So let's see. So do we have everything we need in order to deploy it to Heroku? So all our tests pass. We've checked that Twilio, we understand Twilio's messaging. We understand how to return that. That all works. We tested that through ngrok. What I can do is I can try it locally. I can set an environment variable so that it's closer to Heroku, and make sure that that overrides it. or I could just deploy it. It doesn't take much to deploy it. So let's think about the path here. If we go to our SMS controller, it gets the phone number authorizer, and the phone number authorizer gets this injected, and if that's set as an environment variable, that will override things for us, and it's a service that's injected. All right, so we have all integration tests. Those run. Yeah, I think we can deploy it. So in order to deploy it to Heroku, right, it's really simple. All I have to do, so I set the node config, that's cool. Basically, all I have to do is deploy. And that all that means is I just have to push to GitHub. So let's go ahead and do that. So this is episode 14, refactored to allow for phone for configuration of known phone number. And all right, so commit that. And we'll push that. And so that was pushed successfully. In a second, we'll see that it was actually fully pushed to GitHub. And we can see that now there's a build in progress for our push. So I'm curious what these errors were. I bet, let's look at our metrics. And so this was, oh, this is probably, I turned it off when I wasn't using it, so I turned it back on, so that's cool. That's why we see sort of no memory usage before and then memory usage. And what is our memory usage? It's like, what, 300 megs? Yeah, that's cool. And here's a little blip of where I accessed it to try it out. Here's our load, not much load. We're cool there. Okay, so let's go back to here. So it's now been deployed. So build succeeded and it's been deployed. So we can go ahead and look at it. And so that's KidBank, JitterTed, oops, JitterTed. Oh, I guess I could have just said open app. Okay, so the app's there. Side note is that there's a bug where if you see here, we've got 2 interest credit lines, and there is what I expect to be some time zone issue. I sort of already put that down as a bug that I have to fix, where fix time zone issue. So I'll get to that. Might get to that. If this SMS stuff works, then we're going to look at that bug, because that's kind of concerning. I don't want to have double interest credits. Okay. And so now what I want to do is I want to need to go into Twilio and make sure it's pointing at here. So we can actually fake this, right? Because we know what the format is, right? So it's your, basically form URL encoded of the from and the text message. I don't actually have to even do that. I can actually use Postman or something like that. What I want to do though is I want it to conform to the sort of my hidden known phone number. So let me go. My Postman's gone. Let's open up Postman. And while we're waiting for that to load, let's go to Twilio's configuration. What I want is, so let me go into secret for a second because I don't want to unintentionally reveal stuff. Okay, so what I'm doing now is I'm basically checking in Twilio what is that phone number, right? The receiving phone number for the text messages. Is that going to the right URL? So let's go there. We'll go to configuration. Ah, good. Okay, so one of the nice things is that, let's see, can I show this? Yes, this is fine. I can show this. Sorry, I'm having trouble switching back here. Okay. So what's going on is we're interested in this part where if a message comes in, it'll call a webhook. Right now, the first one is ngrok. If that fails, then it will actually turn around and send it to the Heroku app, which is good. And so all I need to do is make sure that the application is not running, which it is not, correct? Let's just make sure it's not running. Do localhost 8080, and it's not running. Okay, good. So that means this one will fail because ngrok is not hooked up to it. All right, we can even do a curl against that if we wanted to. And hopefully that gives us a sufficient error. 502. Okay, good. Bad gateway, which is perfect. So hopefully that will cause it to fail and then fall back to sending it to the one on Heroku. So if we, I'm just going to send a text message from my phone, which I have encoded as being the right thing. Let's see. Not that one. And it's that one. And so let's say balance. Oh, it worked. Amazing. So let's see if I can make this visible to you on the webcam. So you see I texted balance and it gave me the balance back. Wow, this is awkward. Okay. So that worked. It told me my balance was $200.84, which is that correct? Yes, it is. So cool, it worked. It basically recognized that my phone number was, it understood the command, and it texted me back what my hey, drone killer, I don't allow folks to push YouTube videos in there, so don't do that, please. Thanks. Because I don't have time to validate whether that video is okay or not, so appreciate it. Cool. So this feature is working. It's nice when stuff just works, and I think having really good tests of different kinds really has helped here because it just worked. So let's go back to our code. Okay, Dronka, I don't appreciate you promoting your own stuff. So if it's relevant to what I'm talking about, great. Otherwise, take your chats elsewhere. Then if you're going to post something like that, drunk alert, yeah, okay. Yep. Sorry, I don't take kindly to that stuff, so sorry. If it's relevant, then you can tell me. Otherwise, sorry about that. Okay, where are we? We're time-wise at 12:34, so I have time for sort of one more Pomodoro. But let's take a look at where we are in our project. So request, so basically pull phone number from config, so that's done. Deploy Heroku and point Twilio to Heroku, that's done. That worked. Request balance via SMS, so that basically is done. I think I want to look at this time zone issue, but I'm going to take a quick minute break so that I can sort of clear my head on this thing. So, all right, so I'm going to take a break for like a minute or two, and when we come back, we'll look to see what's going on with that bug. And Pomodoro break just in time. So, all right, be back in 2-3 minutes. What I want to look at now is what the heck is going on with this bug. So, as I mentioned, we've got an interest credit on February 1st, which is correct, but we've also got an interest credit on January 30th. That really makes no sense. And now I'm actually wondering if this is a bug because, okay, so my theory here was something to do with time zones. So my theory was if the server time that this is running on is GMT, so if I access it at, let's say, February 1st, 1 a.m. GMT, I would expect the code to say, oh, we're on February 1st, it's 1 a.m. GMT, right? So sort of it's like server time is 1 a.m. on February 1st and in GMT, right? So this is my scenario, and then I go, so it credits it. But 1 a.m. on February 1st GMT is equal to the last day of January. So we basically, I'm in time zone GMT minus 8, right, Pacific time. And so it's really January, but it's January 31st, right? So that would be January 31st at, what, so 1 a.m. midnight would be, so 5 p.m.? 5 p.m. So Pacific Standard Time. But then I'd expected that to be January 31st. This one, though, is January 30th, and I don't know where that came from. I am not sure. Because if it's this bug, then okay, then I would have expected there to be a transaction on January 31st for the interest credit, even though, because that's my time, my date and time, whereas the server's date and time is February 1st. But it's on January 30th, so that doesn't, right, 30 days, 31 days in January, right? Okay, maybe that's not a bug. Maybe that is just some weird transactions. Let's go and look at, let's see. So yeah, maybe that's not a problem. I would like to, though, have a reset database because I've now sort of got junk data in there. Um, So let's say we do a deposit on, yeah, because here's February 1st. So I would have expected that February 1st would have, if it were sort of a time zone thing, I would have thought, okay, it would have done January 31st. But I have no idea why it did an interest credit on January, unless I just imported that, but the calculation is correct. Uh, hmm. So here's where it'd be nice to have a configuration variable to override what the system thinks the date is. So that way I can sort of inject, sort of it works on my machine but doesn't work on Heroku kind of thing. All right, well, so what I expect is, and it would be hard to test this because I'd have to do it on the first of the month in sort of, the first 7 or 8 hours of the day. Which would be, yeah, that would be hard to control. So let's say, what would happen if I did a deposit on, December 25th, and the amount is, $100. No, not $1,000. Oh, who cares? And this is, gift. Happy holidays. Now, yeah, the problem is it won't back credit these because it looks to see what was the last interest credit it did and then only credit thereafter. And right now I have no way to delete these transactions, which kind of sucks. Um, so, uh, so I feel like I need some information about, or some features for basically manually adding and deleting transactions, or at least resetting the database, because I can always then just re-import stuff through the CSV file. Because I haven't yet treated this as sort of my production system of record yet. I do want to get there. I'm almost there. I feel like now that I can check the balance with SMS, it's actually usable. All right. Well, so this basically needs some more testing. So determine if there's a, so not fixing it, but I'm trying to determine if there's and I'll need more information. So one of the things I'll want to do is actually have it display what it thinks the server date time is. So let's go and do that. So I have a couple of choices. I can have that always displayed on the page, or I can just hit actually, I should be able to get that from Actuator. So something I haven't looked at too deeply yet is, so Spring Boot has some great stuff around let's look at this. So Spring Boot Actuator. I think right now it's protected, and I may have to open that up a bit. So enabling production ready features. I think I have actuator already in there. These are all enabled by default. I forget though if they're secured by default. So can I do an info? What does that do? So by default, all endpoints except for shutdown are enabled. So I can access health. That's actually the only one currently, health and info. So can I do that? Can I go to /info? Actuator info. Is it off of actuator info? Let's look at the raw data. So there's nothing there. How about health? Okay. Well, okay, so they're there, but info isn't producing very much. So I could actually implement the info actuator to say, hey, here's the date time that the system thinks it is. So at least that will help. Okay, so how do I expose info? Let's see. Securing. They're not secure because I don't have Spring Security yet, which I probably want to do pretty quickly because I don't want any of these. I don't think I have any metrics. But these aren't, let's see. Right, they're not exposed on the web anyway. Okay, anyway, I want to see, I don't want to secure it. I want to configure, I want to implement, so let's see. So if I add a bean with an endpoint annotation, so what does that look like? Why are there no examples? I don't want a health indicator. I want an info indicator. How do I create an info indicator? Environment. Get information, build info properties. Here we go. Custom application information. You can customize data exposed by info by setting the info.star Spring properties, all environment properties and the info. Okay. But I want to manually do this. Here we go. Custom info contributor. All right, that's what I want. So let's create one of these. So we basically implement info contributor. And so basically we fill it in. So this is a component. Okay, let's do that. So let's go and create a, and this will be, so this is interesting. From an application architecture, where does this go? This is sort of part of the core application, which I've been putting in the root. But I think those are going to have to move. But for now, it goes in sort of the root package. So this is our clock info contributor. And so it implements the info contributor. And we'll implement that method. And so in here, we get a builder. And we want to say with detail. We don't need to have a map. We can just do a key value and basically say date, time. And that's going to be, we're going to need an instance of a clock. So we'll have to get that injected because this thing is a component. And so we want a clock to be injected. So that's a private final clock. We'll go ahead and create a constructor. This will be auto-wired. And so now I can say clock dot I can get the time zone. That will be useful. So maybe I do want a map here. So what does that look like? So Singleton Map, yeah, that's a good way to go. I think Java 9 has some nicer ways to create maps, but we'll go with this. So Singleton Map, where zone ID and then clock, whoops, wrong paste. Clock dot zone. That's that one. This is a singleton map, but can I have multiple values? It just takes a single key. I actually want more than that because I'm going to want multiple items. So I don't want a singleton map. Is there an easier map creator? Otherwise, I'll just, so we can do maps, as map of, from. What do I want? I want maps where I can pass it in basically a bunch of key value pairs. These are all taking other things. That's not what I want. That's an entry. Filter values as map. Immutable map. Yeah, that's what I want. Okay, so mutable map of, and then I want a bunch of key value pairs. So let's grab this, delete that, and this is going to be info map. And this is .var, and this is info map. And this is basically string to string. And so this is going to be an immutable map of that. And I want date clock dot not instant, but actually, I guess I want the instant, right? So, because this is basically the current represented as defined by the clock. And this is going to, and then from there, I can say, I don't want, let's see, what I want is I sort of want date and time. I could use my date formatter. I'll set date time. Well, I don't know what this does. Okay, what does this have? This might be enough. So let's go ahead and run the application. And then we'll just hit that endpoint and see what we get. Whoops. Oh, whoops, I forgot to wire up the clock. I need a clock provider. Actually, for now, I don't need to inject it, right? There's no reason to inject it. I just want to grab, actually, the current clock. So system default zone. Yeah, let's do that. Then we don't need this constructor. We'll leave it this way because later on we might want to be able to inject, basically have a clock provider that the entire system uses, and that way we can control it even in an environment that we don't, that's not our machine. All right, so let's run this. Because it might be that, and this is sort of the, being a cloud native, you kind of want to start thinking about what time zone you're in, and in general, just be in UTC or GMT and deal with it. Okay, so let's go to localhost, and this is actuator info. Okay, this is actually good, right? This is showing 858 because this is actually showing this is my zone ID, but this is the instant not taking into account the zone. And that's, and this is sort of a business decision. When I do my calculations of when I should credit interest and what date that is, it might be safest to just use UTC or GMT. It's possible that that means if I access it really late at night in my time zone, it thinks it's the next day. I honestly don't think that's such a huge deal. I'd have to be a bit more concerned about that if that was a big deal, then it's like, what time zone is your bank, right? I mean, that's really the question here. What time zone does it consider itself to be in? We can, and so for interest credits, do they happen at midnight? It would actually be easier if it didn't do it at midnight, if it did it at noon. So that way, even, you'd have to be further than -12 or +12 off for it to be really a problem. But if the time zone of the bank is UTC, right, so it's 8 hours ahead, and so if I'm accessing it late on January 31st, it thinks it's the next day. How much does that matter? I would say for this kind of application, I mean, even a real bank, you have to figure that out. Are you at the local time? When do you credit interest? Is the interest crediting the local time of the bank? What if it's a worldwide bank? What time zone is that in? So those are some interesting questions. But having this in here will help us maybe to troubleshoot stuff, but maybe it's just not a big deal, and it is what it is. Okay, so that's that. That's that. But let's push this anyway because this is interesting to have. And this is date time. And this is clock info. All right, so let's stop that. We'll commit this. We're still in episode 14 and added clock information at the actuator info endpoint. So commit that and push it. And I think that means we're done for today. So let's go to our Trello board. I'm going to put this back into bug. And that's it for today. Hope this was interesting, and have a good weekend. I will see you next week. Bye-bye.